Everyone. It's now 4 p.m. at least in my time, in Amsterdam time. And very welcome to this final Winter Wednesday webinar from ESTSS and European Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. Before we start, I would like to thank and acknowledge the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma, which is a resource center and global network for journalists, journalism educators, and health professionals who are dedicated to improving media coverage of trauma, conflict, and tragedy. The DART Center allowed us to connect to some of the speakers today, so we could bring you this webinar here. A very special welcome to our speakers, and we're very lucky and humbled to have such eminent speakers amongst us. All of whom can speak from their professional expertise and background on today's topic, as well as from a personal perspective. Covering the news and uncovering malpractices and crimes has become more and more a high-risk profession. Harassment, aggression, threats to life, threats to loved ones are more and more a predictable side effect of this job. And it's clear that these are not standalone incidents, and they point towards longer ongoing processes of polarization and even radicalization, using scare tactics and scapegoating for journalists. And the COVID pandemic, with people relying even more heavily on online information, has in many respects been an accelerator of these processes. So I'm going to share just briefly, if I'm able to, yeah, I think this will work. And now, yeah, so this is us today with a focus on trauma in journalism and responding to increased aggression and threats to journalists. This is the webinar series that we are closing now with this webinar. So maybe you've already seen some of the former webinars on intensive treatment for PTSD and quality of trauma care. And today's speakers, of course. And the things that we're going to be looking at today is to create awareness about the increased unsafety for journalists. So how are they affected by threats and aggression? The effects on their personal health, but also on sense of safety in greater society, and what personal or occupational or societal factors can shape the outcomes of this exposure. And we're also going to discuss ways the mental health community can support and also advocate for journalists. So what can we do to contribute to this justice? Let me just see. No, I'm not going to the take-home messages just yet. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. You can see some of the speakers here today. And I thought, what should I do? Should I introduce all of the speakers at the beginning or at the beginning of their presentations? And I think that I will do the latter. So I'm first going to introduce the first speaker to you so that their background is still fresh in your memory when they start. But I am going to share their names with you. So we'll start with Trond Idas. And then we're going with Sanne Terlinge. Then Robert van der Noorda will speak, and finally Jana Javakishvili will be the speaker. And then we'll come back and have a panel discussion with some of the take-home messages that I almost gave away just now. Okay, so if you have questions, you can post them in the Q&A. You can also use the chat, so we have the chat open, but it's more convenient to see your questions in the Q&A, so that we can pick them up, for instance, at the end of the presentations or at the end with the panel discussion. You can use the chat if you, for instance, have some technical problems that we can maybe assist with. Okay, and then we have Angelina already looking forward to the discussion. We are too, Angelina, thank you. Let me see if I haven't forgotten anything. Yes, so we have 90 minutes today. So the webinar will end at 5:30. Yeah, I think that's about all of the household messages that I have to do. So Then we continue with introducing Trond to you. Trond has worked in journalism for a long time, and he's also been involved in the Norwegian Union for Journalists for a long time. He's a special advisor when it comes to work environment, safety, and media policies. He's also a former member of the National Commission for UNESCO and the Council of Europe's Committee of Experts on Protection of Journalism and Safety of Journalists. He's a national contact for the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, and he's been a quartermaster when it comes to raising awareness of trauma exposure in this field and getting trauma help for journalists. Trond's currently finishing his PhD in post-traumatic stress among journalists as a result of news coverage of serious crime, the tsunami in 2004-2005, the 2011 terrorist attacks in Norway, and sexual harassment on Me Too. So Trond, with that, I would like to give the floor to you. Would you like me to signal you whenever the time's up or almost up? Is that okay?
Yes, please. Yes,
okay.
Please do that.
I will.
Okay, thank you very much, Joanna. As Joanna mentioned, we have done quite a few studies in Norway on different kind of situations, journalists come into as journalists doing their job, and what we have tried to find out is what we can do to protect them in a way from trauma, and very much about what the newsrooms can do and their colleagues can do. One of the studies is on hate speech and threats towards journalists. And that's a study we did the first time in 2012, and we had a following up study in 2014. And so I will show you some of the results from that study. Let's see. Okay. What we saw about 10 years ago was that quite a few journalists experienced threats, harassment, that kind of experiences, and the number of cases was growing quite rapidly because of, especially with the smartphones, which made it much easier to connect to the journalist in person. Before that, you typically had to go by the newsroom, contacting them by the newsroom. It didn't have that kind of direct contact with the journalist. And so this was a kind of a new problem. At least the number of cases was growing, and the situations was more severe than before. So, some of the journalists contacted me and told that they got problems because of this, like health issues, but also that threats had a chilling effect. So we made this first survey and the second one, and what we especially looked into was how we could kind of prevent more severe problems. We saw that social support from their colleagues, and especially from the leaders in the newsroom, was an important factor. So that was what we looked into in this second study in 2014, and it was a kind of new topic, really, both in Norway and internationally, to go into looking at what that kind of experiences do with journalists. Two aims with the study. We looked at the effects of threats and hate speech, both chilling effect, as I mentioned, and health issues. And then we really would like to study what social support, what effect social support have on this situation.
Trond, just to mention,
Yep.
for me, you sound quite at a distance, so
Okay.
I'm not sure if anyone else has the same sound effects, but maybe it's you can speak up a little bit.
Yeah. Is it better? Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better, way better. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What we did was to send a survey to all active members of the union, and 1,100 of them responded. Of those, about half of them had at least one experience of threats and hate speech during the last years. What we measured what was health issues, different kind of health issues, like depression, anxiety, and so on. We looked at chilling effect, like journalists not covering that kind of issues anymore, or not commenting or not reading comments. Different kind of chilling effects, really. We looked at 5 different kind of threats, from harassment to violence. Then we looked at what kind of confrontations the journalists had experienced, and the number of confrontations. Everything from meeting readers on the street to calls and messages and so on. And then we looked at what channels this threats and harassment was delivered in. And we looked at social support at work, and we looked at both organized support and perceived support. What we saw was first look at the confrontation, and to what extent confrontation had an effect on health issues and chilling effect. We can see that confrontation had some effect, significant effect, both on health issues and chilling effect. The number of confrontations. We do also see that the threats and hate speech have a stronger effect than confrontations itself. And we see that the channels used and the number of channels used have a special effect on chilling effect. Was not, we didn't find any significant effect on health issues related to the number of channels. The effect of social support, organized social support. What we found was that organized social support diminished the health issues, but did not have effect on the chilling effect. Perceived support have a significant effect on health issues, but not on chilling effect. As you can see, that the effect on health issues was positive, or it was positive, and which we not expected really. I will comment a little bit more on that. As expected, threats and hate speech was the strongest predictor for health disease and chilling effect. The number of confrontations had a significant effect both on health issues and chilling effect, but not as strong as threats. The number of channels, kind of amount of messages and that kind of things, had effect on, had a chilling effect. What we saw was that more organized support had a significant positive effect on the journalist's health. And when it comes to perceived support, as I mentioned, it was kind of surprising finding that it seems that the more support you receive, the higher score on health issues. And really don't, it might be because of the scale used was developed for this survey. So that might be the reason, but really don't know why we got that score. And neither organized or perceived support had a significant effect on the chilling factor. When it comes to practical implications, you see that threats and hate speech kind of work that way, that it have a negative effect on journalists and their health and journalism in general. That negative effects are both, we can see both on health and on chilling effect, as mentioned. And we see that social support is important to prevent problems, both for the journalist and for the journalism done by the journalists. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can send me an email or Claus Backholm, who I'm cooperating with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trond. Very interesting stuff, especially very impressive as well. The numbers that you just showed us, also the amount of journalists that mentioned that they were victimized by hate speech or other types of harassment. And I had a question, actually. You mentioned that chilling effect, of course. So how does this relate to also like development of longer term health complaints? Do you know?
We have not really done studies on that. I'm working on a survey we did last year after the terror in Norway, 10 years after the terror. And I guess you will see some of the same effects after threats, maybe. Mm-hmm. But what you see is that it's the level of stress reactions related to the 10-year anniversary is rather high mm-hmm. when we look at it 10 years after. And because, of course, that's related to anniversary, and I guess we'll have some of the same effects, or when you look at journalists who have experienced especially threatening situation, that it might be when that memory is triggered, that it will result in a high level of stress reaction.
Yeah.
Both at the time when it's happening, but also in a period afterwards. But we have really not done studies on that. So
no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that will be very interesting to see how that develops maybe in time. And I can imagine, you know, it's especially in this type of profession, it's quite different from going through a disaster or perhaps a terror attack, that it's oftentimes continuous. I think that we will hear more of these stories as well from the other speakers, that it can be triggered again and again and again, also to an extent by these like cumulative incidents of harassment. Yeah, very interested to see what that does to like personal health consequences in the long term. Yeah, and you mentioned there was quite a surprising effect that perceived support at work wasn't related to better health outcomes. But the one thing that came in to mind was whether it has kind of the same effect as the previous like debriefing studies, that like this immediate individual sessions or attention for the acute aftermath of these incidents might not always be a good thing to do. It can maybe even, turn things to the worse when it comes to, that setting like the memories early on for in these negative intrusions. So is that something that could be an explanation?
It might be an explanation. We have discussed that, but we really don't know. And we are planning to do a new survey this year on a general survey where threats and harassment is one of the issues. And we are not started discussing the survey and the questions there, but I will try to figure out one way to go deeper into this, trying to understand this kind of effect, because we really don't know.
Yeah. But I think this study already gives good indications on what we could do as a mental health community to start organizing support as well. Yeah. So we'll keep this in mind while we're going to listen to the other speakers. Thank you so much, Trond. I see I'm going to take a peek at the Q&A. And I'm going to take one question. I wonder if you can comment on whether or not there is a proximity element to this, whether stories closer to home or closer to the personal sphere show a differing degree of association, Gavin asks. So is there some factor in it that things that touch close to home have like an increasing effect? To Trond?
What we see is that if it's a typical kind of threat is not only towards the journalists, but it's also towards his family, his children, and so on, or her. And that's, of course, an additional factor giving more stress. And we see that local journalists who knows or are part of a smaller community where everybody knows the journalist, and it seems like the effect of threats and harassment is stronger than working for one of the national medias, where the threats is kind of more, you really don't know, or you don't have any kind of reason to know who is threatening you if it's anonymous, of course. So, but younger journalists react stronger. That's one of the things we see. Female journalists react stronger. We do also see that threats to war towards women is more sexualized than threats against men. It's typical for other kind of violence. And I guess that's the same kind of findings you do with other groups than journalists when it comes to gender. But what we have seen in the court cases, when I follow journalists to courts, is that quite a few of those who are threatening journalists are threatening quite broadly towards different kind of groups, like towards the social security system, towards health care persons. So they're using quite a lot of the time of threats really towards different kind of groups, where journalists are one of the groups which are threatened. So and then we, a kind of problem, or a special problem for journalists, is that some of the groups who are threatening journalists are doing it to get publicity about their own activities, because like Islamistic group, for instance, used threats toward journalists as a PR project, really, because they know they will get they will be in the evening news, and for those who support them, it's a kind of good PR. So that's a dilemma really for the media, how to cover those kind of threats, really, because of course you don't want to be a kind of PR instrument for those groups.
Yeah, I can imagine. So Trond, maybe we can, I see a few more questions for you and for the content of your presentation, but I think we're going to take that to the discussion at the end. But there you are.
Yes.
Robert from the Noorder. Yeah, so you will be our next speaker. And you actually have a background in engineering. We talked about it yesterday. And through that, you worked in and lived for a number of years in Russia and Ukraine. And it's there that you developed an interest in like studying and analyzing propaganda, Russian propaganda, and especially disinformation and methods of internet trolls. And as a result of this, you applied for a journalism school with a focus on software development and social media. And then you started developing ways to detect trolls and social media disinformation campaigns. All the while you published many of your work in major national and international newspapers. And then 2 years ago, with a partner, you founded a software company called Trollrensics to analyze hybrid warfare, troll armies, and propaganda on social media.
Indeed. Yeah, that sums it up pretty nicely. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, take it away. I
will switch to, I will start sharing my my presentation. Yeah, it's a very unusual name, which is good in a way, I think. It's a combination of forensics and trolls. So I've been working as a journalist since 1997. I started working at some point in Ukraine in 2004 during Orange Revolution. That was the sort of revolution just prior to Yushchenko becoming the Ukrainian president at that time. And I got very interested in Eastern European politics, so Ukrainian politics and Russian politics. I spent years and years working in Ukraine. So you have a lot of Russian experts in the Netherlands, but not so many people who really know Ukraine from left to right and north to south. I also worked a lot of years in Russia. The interesting thing is, when Maidan started, I was at that time living and working in Moscow, and what I noticed were two things that really puzzled me in the beginning. The first thing was that on the news you saw stories that were made with actors, completely untrue. I remember at some point coming home, I turned on the television and there was this old lady, Babushka, being interviewed by some young Russian reporter. She said that she is in Kharkiv and they killed a lot of Russian people in some building there and they were burning the bodies outside. I thought, okay, let me call a friend in Kharkiv. Well, a very good friend of mine lives there, so I called him. And he started laughing, not in a very positive way, but he said, yeah, we see those stories constantly. He said, there's nothing going on here because otherwise there would be something in the news. There was nothing. It was completely untrue. I watched those things on TV for weeks, months. The other interesting thing that I noticed was sort of upcoming on social media, a lot of trolls on different social media, so on Facebook and Twitter. And I was really puzzled. Like I never noticed all these weird accounts. A lot of them were created very recently. Some were older, but they seem to be pushing the same narratives. So I started doing it. I used to work with databases a lot. So I'm not a computer scientist, but I do have a background in data analysis. And I started looking at ways, how can I tell that this is actually a troll account? How can you find out whether it's an organized campaign or if there's a real person behind it or not? And it's in the end, it's all data. So, I mean, a lot of these trolls use fake pictures, either generated by artificial intelligence, or they just stole their picture from somebody else on some website or some other social media profile. They use the same email addresses. There are a lot of these things that you can investigate and in the end tell whether it's an organized campaign or hybrid warfare. A lot of my work from the last, so that was 8 years ago, a lot of my work is on Russian disinfo campaigns aimed at, I don't know, Belgium or or Brexit or the US elections, or one of my main topics is MH17. I think this is really one of the most brilliant studies on propaganda from the last few years. It started in 2017. It's an Oxford University report. They did it first in 2017, where they found organized campaigns in 28 countries. A year later, 2018, it already rose to 48. In 2019, and the report was released in September, so we still had 1 quarter to go. It was already up to 70, and in 2020, it reached already 81. It's the two main drivers, funny enough, are one, this internet research agency, this massive Russian troll army based in St. Petersburg, and the second thing that drives this propaganda is everybody's seen these Trump MAGA far-right trolls pushing stuff on internet. Sometimes thousands of them push the same message. So basically the rest of the world could see that that it works to influence the world like this using social media. So I don't just use Facebook, but we do this kind of investigations on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and 4chan, etc. But this is a very powerful sign that it's getting worse and worse with this propaganda. In the Netherlands, I also saw a change in about 6-7 years ago. One of the craziest things I've seen is that some far-right party, together with some a bit rightish blog, started an sort of referendum on the association agreement with Ukraine, the EU agreement, which is nothing more than a trade agreement, but there were massive amounts of propaganda shared and a lot of troll activities. That was an interesting thing to do. This rise of propaganda, the other thing that people could see is that in the last 6, 7, 8 years, a lot of this far-right media started. A lot of it's quite new, so it's not just this propaganda on social media, but channels like Voice of Europe, Breitbart, and I can name, I don't know, dozens of others which were never there before like 7 years ago. So in the Netherlands, it's not just related to Russian propaganda, but a lot of Dutch journalists who wrote something about Russia or Eastern European politics were targeted by trolls online. The first thing that happened, and I never had that with anything I've written before, that it starts with yes, sometimes anonymous accounts or accounts which may not be real. So there might be a name attached to this account, but I could never find the person behind it. So they start harassing you. So you're a leftist type of journalist, and you're full of shit, and it's all bullshit what you're publishing, and God knows what. I will not repeat all the harsh language that was used, but sometimes it was massive. So we're talking about, in some cases, hundreds and hundreds of these accounts. The other thing is that what they do is they send you direct messages on Facebook Messenger, or they send you emails, or send you messages through Twitter, direct message, that kind of stuff. That was not so bad. All these threats, but the real threat started when you get phone calls, and what Sanne Terlinge also mentioned, that they start threatening your family. So at some point I had some guy who was a mailman. I found out who the real guy was. He was a mailman, and he didn't like the fact that all my work around MH17 seemed to indicate that Kremlin was behind the downing of airplane flight MH17. And he started offering people money for details of where my children were going to school, stuff like that. You wouldn't, yeah, it's bizarre what some of these people do. But then it got even more interesting, and I think I'm probably target number one for these Russian trolls in the Netherlands. What they did is they started these cases against me. So in Dutch it's called Raad voor de Journalistiek. In English it's the Netherlands Press Council. And the people who started this, they call themselves journalists, but they're more like sort of citizen journalists, bloggers, or they work for far-right, pro-Russian, strange type of propaganda media. And they started three of those cases at this Netherlands Press Council. And one person even started a regular court case against me on some sort of defamation claim, which I will explain in a minute. This is, by the way, the first time that I ever tell anyone something in public during a seminar on what happens, all this kind of stuff. There was one guy he was relentless. If I would write anything which was not related to Russia, he would not react. The moment that there was something about Russia MH17, the second it was published, he would start bashing me, and not just him, but also all his friends. A lot of anonymous, strange accounts, Russian trolls suddenly found their way to me in this faraway country called the Netherlands. He had been doing that. Yeah, at the moment I think it started probably like 6 or 7 years ago. At some point it got interesting because he started something called Bonanza Media, which is a sort of media site, and then he publishes articles. And he started it with somebody who is known for her propaganda on MH17. It's a Russian journalist who used to work for Russia Today called Yana Yerlashova. And so we started an investigation. At first, I did it for a magazine in the Netherlands called Groene Amsterdammer, the green person from Amsterdam. It's one of the oldest, or the oldest magazine in the Netherlands. A lot of political stories that they publish. And we found out that this Jana, what she had been doing was interesting. She spent a lot of time in Donbass, near the area where this MH17 was shot down. What she apparently did was, the moment that it was shot down, she and some other people, I don't know, maybe Russian army or whatever, or this DNR people, they collected parts of the airplane. And what they would do is the moment that they got some international visitor, so it could be a politician or it could be a Dutch journalist or a French journalist or whatever, they would throw all these pieces in some field and then take this person there and say like, look, these Dutch did no investigation at all the parts are still in the fields here. So they really used parts of this airplane to meddle with these investigations. And the guy who worked at this media, his name is Max van der Werf. He's been the main guy in Russian media as the sort of Dutch expert that Russia was not behind the downing of flight MH17. At some point, and it's 99%, it's more a Bellingcat investigation, but Bellingcat started a further investigation. I helped a bit with the investigation. And we managed to prove that this Max van der Werf was actually working with or for this Russian military intelligence agency called GRU. So he had their phone and he traveled with these people, and he could write in any media like Sputnik or Russia Today, etc. Because of his connections. That goes quite far. I think that's quite bizarre that some Dutch blogger who spends years on pushing propaganda about this flight actually works with this GRU. A week after we published this, he managed to find my private address, and he he paid a debt collector to bring me a letter saying that it was sort of defamation case from my side because now he was exposed and people think he was working for this military intelligence agency, and he wanted to see a lot of money. In the end, he didn't, or probably his lawyer thought like, it's a difficult case because there's quite a lot of proof that he's working with the Russians here that will not be very helpful to actually start the court case. But I wasn't home, so my wife got this letter shoved in her face, and that's quite interesting. In a very negative way, it can be influence your life at home. It's not just working for a newspaper anymore, but these people are outside your door, and they can be again tomorrow or whatever. This is the article. So it was published on two sites. This is the Bellingcat version. So in Bonanza Media with this Max van der Werf works in coordination with this Russian military secret service. And it's not just me. There are a lot of other journalists in the Netherlands targeted by this. It doesn't always have a Russian background. It can also have a background. Now people are threatened, not just journalists, but also politicians because of this COVID situation. And a lot of these threats have their background in propaganda. People don't trust their government anymore. They think this COVID doesn't exist, or we will all turn into lizards in 2 years. And at some point, people get really aggressive and start visiting the places where politicians live, or start threatening journalists and this kind of stuff. So that's rising, and one of the drivers is definitely this propaganda. Yeah. I have some pointers, but I think Joanna will mention those a bit later. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, maybe you can pull up the last slide anyway.
Yeah.
So we can use it maybe as like a conclusion, and for people to maybe think, oh, this is something that I want to know a little bit more about.
Shall I briefly say something about it?
Yeah,
Would you like to? You can also do it if you want.
No, it's your story. You can do it.
Yeah. I started this software company to be able to counter propaganda, and I'm not interested in one anonymous account. I don't interfere with freedom of speech at all. I'm just interested in very heavy inauthentic behavior, troll farms, hybrid warfare, influencing by foreign parties, whether that's Russia or another country. And I think we're not really used yet to all this propaganda, and it's difficult to counter. And some people don't understand it. In my opinion, it would be great if we could embed education about this propaganda and radicalization, starting even with elementary school. I sometimes give lessons at even elementary schools in this topic. I think it's still worthwhile to do more research on propaganda and creating and improving awareness of your citizens in whatever country you are. I think it's the psychology behind this, and especially where people radicalize, they really go down the whole rabbit hole. Some people you probably never reach anymore. They will never believe facts anymore. But it would be interesting to do more studies on the impact of propaganda and how we could prevent it. And the last thing, which I really would hope that there are some things moving and there's something going on, but what I would really like is at some point on the country level and EU level, and maybe later on even more international than the EU, it would be good to have legislation. And sometimes it's like, for instance, on doxing, when you send, I know, some politician's address, when you put it on social media, some people hope then that people will start harassing those politicians. There is now legislation in the to make that illegal, and I think suddenly it's becoming more of a sort of cyber type of topic, and the EU would like legislation on in this field. And there's one thing very important. And that is, we would need to cooperate with platforms, social media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, great. I think these are also good indications of what more mental health professionals or the mental health community can also contribute to. For instance, accumulating more evidence, for the psychological effects of this, or what psychological factors are at play, when it comes to people being attracted to these radical ideas, and to even go as far as harassing journalists online, for instance, but also in terms of providing these preventive strategies by educating the community early on, making people aware, creating resilience. So I think these are very good, pointers that we can take along. So thanks so much, Robert. Yeah, and I hope we have some time left afterwards to discuss this further. I'm now going to give the floor to Jana. So
thank
Robert,
you, John.
I think you can stop sharing your screen. Yeah.
John, I'm going to share my presentation myself. So
very well. Yeah. Let me just briefly introduce you, Jana, for those who haven't met Jana yet. Very happy that I can announce our immediate past president of ESTSS. Jana is also professor of psychology and the director of the Institute of Addiction Studies at Ilia State University in Tbilisi. And she's an advocate or even an activist when it comes to supporting groups who've been a victim of war or political oppression. And her expertise and background in trauma effects are wide and include military conflicts and displacement, natural disasters, and terrorist attacks on all levels of society. And today she will talk about violence and aggression against journalists in Georgia as an example for young democratic nations. So the floor is yours, Jana.
Thank you so much, John. I'm very happy that I have this chance to speak today, this evening, and share a case of Georgia with our colleagues. Let me full screen. Oops, sorry. Yep. Here we are. Yeah. So actually, I am going to continue what Robert started. My presentation is also about hybrid warfare, but in Georgia, as a country with young democracy and country in crisis and suffering from frozen conflicts, and sometimes not frozen, time to time. Actually, hybrid warfare goes beyond cyber format. and it has an impact on the societal fabric, on the societal well-being, hinders democracy. And I will try in a very short and brief presentation to speak how it works in Georgia and how it works for the media professionals in Georgia. So I would like to start with the Transparency International quote from their 2021 report on media environment in Georgia. So they are saying that the situation regarding the media environment has reached a critical level in the country. In recent years, journalist professional activities have become life-threatening and dangerous, especially for critical media representatives. So now I would definitely state that in Georgia, journalists, if you are a critical media representative, that's life-threatening profession. So just to give some very brief background information, Georgia is a Black Sea side country, lower middle income country with 3.7 million of population, suffering from military conflicts starting from early 90s when the country regained independence from Russia. And this military conflicts turned into war with Russia in 2008. And actually that was a 5 days war, but the war did not stop there. It transformed to hybrid format. And I will try to explain how it is going now. So that's pogrom of critical media journalists, which happened last year on July 5th. Actually, before I will come to the story of this program, that was a viral photography then in media. So I would like to say that hybrid war, it has many different dimensions. And as for Georgia, one of the key dimensions of the hybrid war against our state is stimulating the growth of ultranationalistic, in fact, fascistic formations, groups who are hindering Euro-Atlantic integration of the country, hindering democracy, and disseminating intolerant attitude towards any kind of differences, like any kind of minorities, like ethnic minorities or religious minorities or gender and sexual minorities, etc., etc. Actually, these groups are supported by the local actors who are collaborating with Russia. So that's one of the prominent and influential actors as Georgian Orthodox Church. But these groups are also utilized by the government to maintain power. So nowadays, Georgia does not actually live through the best period of our life. It's pretty difficult, complicated context in our country. The current government actually utilizes these ultranationalistic groups to influence election results. These groups are instrumentalized. And July 5th is one of the illustrations of this instrumentalization of fear and violence within our society. So how it started? Actually, the case is pretty trivial. One of the groups which does not have enough tolerance in our Orthodox Christian Church, that's LGBTQ community. Actually, about 8 years ago, that was for the first time when LGBT community representatives were going to have their pride, and the Georgian Orthodox Church mobilized its congregation to beat up the pride participants, and the police was not that effective to maintain calm situation, and the situation was pretty violent. And you are seeing here one of our bishops with the chair as an instrument for beating people. So that's the actually background information. So in spring of 2021, the Pride again declared that they are going actually to organize Pride on July 5th. On July 4th, Georgian Orthodox Church mobilized their congregations, but also ultranationalistic groups fed by Russia, because funding channels are leading to the Kremlin of these groups. So they just occupied places where the Pride was going to happen. And within this context, actually, Pride leaders decided to cancel the event. But journalists on 5th of July went to these places just to cover this case. What happens there is that the ultranationalistic groups who were aggressively agitated, they actually made pogrom of LGBTQ community offices. But when they did not find LGBTQ community members, they just beaten up journalists, media professionals. And that was very selective aggression, because it was against critical media representatives, and not all media representatives, all the media representatives that were there. So in a result, 53 media representatives were beaten. Some of them needed acute medical help. And one of the cameramen passed away in several days because of injuries. So that's his funeral, where the journalist community is saluting to him. What I would like to say, I would like to describe a context which preceded this pogrom, which accompanied this pogrom, and which actually happened, what happened aftermath. So preceded context is about Georgian Orthodox Church scandal, which was triggered by the coverage of the closed children's institution. Actually, by Georgian legislation, we cannot have closed children's institution, because we are in the process of deinstitutionalization, and the legislation is adjusted to this process, changed, transformed for better. But what the journalists found out, the closed children's institutions, then they invited their public defender. A lot of children's rights violations were found there. So that was quite a scandal, still going on scandal. And aftermath of the tragedy, when the journalist passed away, actually one of the bishops who has high positions in the church told that journalists irritated the public with the coverage of the children's institution. And thus it's natural that the public is angry on journalists. So he was just trying to say that that was not wrongdoing by the side of the ultranationalistic groups. Another contextual factor is elections. So in 2020, October of 2020, we had parliamentary elections, and the current government rules for 9 years the country, and we have setbacks in terms of democratic developments, Euro-Atlantic integration. But they try to maintain power. And actually, freedom of speech, which is pretty developed in Georgia in comparison with the other former Soviet republics, actually is perceived as a threat from the side of the government. And critical media are perceived as enemies. So, in fact, the rhetoric of the government supports violence against the journalists. So usually government representatives are blaming journalists in a way, very naive way, but it still works, that if media would not make the audience nervous, everything in the country would be all right. So naive, but efficient somehow. Another thing which is going on from the side of the government, that's boycotting the critical media for periods of time, that's bullying and mocking, direct bullying and mocking of particular journalists when they are approaching with request of interviews. And that's also utilization of the ultranationalistic groups just to victimize media, as happened on July 5th. And one more interesting thing, actually, after the tragedy, is that the ultranationalistic group who is responsible for pogrom and killing was not prosecuted in a just way. The case was registered by the forensic laboratory as drug-related death. And of course, he was drugged because he has injuries. And of course, he had painkillers in his body. And actually, this ultranationalistic group, Russian Fed, was granted cable broadcasting of a national scale. Actually, civil society initiated the court process against them, but the ultranationalistic group won, and not because of corruption. The paradox of the situation is that the Georgian legislation promotes freedom of speech, and that's a dilemma, how to secure freedom of speech but fight hybrid war agents in our country. Mm-hmm. So I will move to the conclusions, and I hope that in 1 minute I will be done. So conclusions, my conclusions are that ongoing hybrid warfare in the world, which Robert started to speak about it, has its battlefield in Georgia as well, and journalists are in the first echelon to fight this hybrid war because of certain level of freedom of speech, which we try to maintain, and also the first to face life-threatening risks because of this hybrid war. And actually, we need to realize that journalists nowadays in the countries like Georgia, they are in a battlefield, and they are somehow warriors for democracy. And they are exposed to all the risks that warriors are exposed on the battlefield. Another thing is that violence against journalists needs to be addressed from the multi-track perspective. Of course, from stress and trauma perspective, but also from justice and human rights perspectives. And I would say that psychotraumatology, as it is developed now, is exactly the multi-track response to traumatic experiences. We all know that if trauma is complex and is related to socio-political violence, it needs multi-track response. And the next conclusion, I try to show which are levels of to target and to work to change or to address risks and problems related to the described what I described above, and how we can create protective shields at different levels. So the first level.
Can I ask maybe that the other speakers can also join at this moment, because I think this ties in nicely with the things that we already heard. So Trond, Robert, Sanne.
I would love to, please.
Yeah, if you would like to turn on your cameras and maybe sound, because these, I think, the vision that you show us, in the different levels, we can see that many of the same points were addressed as well.
Very well. So international community. Awareness of the risks that media professionals face, to rethink and redefine their status. Because, for example, I will take example of reaction of the international community on Georgian case, on July 5th case. Actually, some international human rights organizations redefined journalists as as risky profession as human rights defenders profession is. And they now are advocating for the similar kind of special support measures for the journalists, like free of charge counseling, psychotherapy, burnout prevention, moral injury focused work. So that's all about special attention and special services from the side of the international community to support. Media organizations, that's about capacity building for defining safety and security strategies, and that's not only about mental health strategies. That's physical safety and security and mental health safety and security. Staff care and employment assistance programs, which are needed to be put in place. And the third one, last but not least, that's journalist communities themselves, especially freelance journalists in need of capacity building to implement stress and trauma-informed journalism, and to build their capacity in self-care, peer support, and of course, that DART Center, which is co-organizer or helped us to organize this webinar, does a lot in this direction. I think that's a lot to do in the future. Yeah, and
I think so
and here
too.
we
Yeah,
are.
yeah. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
for
much,
that.
Jana. And as you can all see, you know, we would have had much more to talk about. We have lots to talk about, but only unfortunately, you know, just a minute to go. If you allow me, I will just briefly share some of the take-home message that we heard from the presentations today, is that we are faced with a high prevalence of all sorts of traumatic exposure in the journalist profession and the news coverage profession. And it's important to create that awareness and resilience by research, for instance, on propaganda and radicalization, but in all of these levels that Jana just mentioned. And that our focus should be as much on prevention as it is on organizing support. And one of the comments in the Q&A was also that it also has to do with creating that peer support and not just triage or identification for people who are already suffering from the consequences of this type of exposure. So, you know, panelists, speakers, I know that we're going over time, so I'm apologizing for that, but I was just mesmerized by all of your talks, and I wanted you to be able to perform them as well as possible. Any last comments from you, perhaps? The speakers.
I would say just keyword, multi-track cooperation.
Multi-track cooperation, yeah. Yeah, Robert, do you have any last keywords that you want to add?
Yeah, but basically this cooperation, maybe first on an EU level, and will be good to do. We can learn a lot from each other. I think together we're a lot stronger than just one country or one journalist or one type of media. And yeah, it changed a lot the last couple of years. What is happening around the world? So it's getting worse. This violence and intimidation, and a lot of people and organizations are not ready for this.
Yeah, yeah. Trond.
Yes, I would just say thank you for addressing these topics, because it's not very well known outside the media business, really, that the journalists are victims as well. So, of course, it's very important part.
Yeah.
But it's just to work with. Yep.
Great, thank you, and I hope that we can continue to give attention also from this platform to these issues. Well, Sanne, I'm going to end with you.
Yeah, I also want to thank you for organizing this session, because I think that's really important that this topic comes to the people who investigate trauma and who practice trauma therapy. Maybe we can also do it the other way around. that we organize a conference for journalists where people can explain us what trauma is and how to support each other, because I think that our group, our profession has still a lot to learn.
Yeah, well, we're happy to jump in. So
Yeah.
I have to say, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to end this webinar. I just wanted to show you a save the date for our conference in Belfast next year. And of course, thank you for joining and please subscribe to ECZ News for latest activities. If you're interested in slides, those will be also made available alongside the recording. So you will receive that in your inbox. So thank you very much and hope to see you at one of our next events.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Have a good evening.